Today on The Riff, we start a two-part episode that walks through the story of the Caldwells. BJ, Aimee, thank you for sharing your story with all of us. We're honored that you would share something so personal, and we pray that this is helpful and hopeful for all that listen.
Well, welcome to another episode of The Riff. I am Jeremy, and wherever you are joining us, however you're joining us, we're glad to have you. And today I have some special guests who are North Pointers, BJ and Aimee Caldwell, and I want to welcome them into The Riff. First time on The Riff.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Long-time listeners, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
A few of them. Yeah.
Wow, that's a big deal. Part of the Riff Raff. And so we're glad to have you today. And I've been looking forward to our conversation because I really believe it's going to be helpful for a lot of people. So thank you for coming in and walking through your story with us. So I want to start by just kind of figuring out how do we get to where BJ and Aimee are BJ and Aimee? So did you grow up here, both of you? What's your story?
We went to school in Kabul, so tiny little town.
Is that by the Boot Hill, or it's towards the Boot Hill in the direction
West
of
Plainsy.
Okay, yeah.
So we went to school there, little in different groups, so we didn't cross paths until after we had already graduated high school. But I told him I wouldn't date him for more than 5 years, and so we got married 2 weeks shy of 5 years of dating.
Okay.
And so,
was that over in that area still?
we had, I went to college up here in Springfield, but he still lived down there. Had some breaks in that time there as we went to our different various schools and trainings, and then got married in 2004. And have lived here in Springfield and Battlefield area ever since.
Yeah, y'all still have family in Kabul?
Yes. My dad's the plumber.
Oh, really? The plumber?
The plumber.
Like, that means like the best one, or Kabul's got population one plumber?
He was the only. He's got some competition now, but I still think it's safe.
Okay.
Yes. So
if you're in Kabul and you're got some plumbing needs, figure out the right one. Very good. So then Springfield's been home for many years. So tell me a little bit about faith background growing up. Was that something? Was it different for you all? What did that look like?
Well, I had zero until I was almost 30. So I don't know that I ever even opened a Bible until I was in my late 20s.
Ever dragged to church on Easter, Christmas?
When I stayed the night at the wrong friend's house, I would go on Sundays or Wednesdays. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually I got baptized at North Point. So that's really where I got going with it.
Okay.
It was the birth of our first daughter that really, I think, I had been trying for years because I grew up in the church. I was every Sunday night, Wednesday youth, all the church camps. I did all of that. And so then when that was really one of the pauses the only pause I had with marrying him was that difference in the faith. But my Mimi said to keep trying. And so I kept trying. So slowly and slowly, but it was the birth of our first child, I think, that really decided he was going to try it out. And so we went to many churches.
And in this area, I could take a decade to try a church shop around here. There's a lot of options.
It took a while. And this was the first, North Point was the first one we dropped our little girl off in the Kid Point area.
Okay.
And we knew then that whenever we trusted you with our child, now we are going to be okay.
So at what point had you visited a couple times or like, I don't think I'm ready to drop my kid off yet?
I came by myself for several times before I thought, okay, now he can come. And then he came a couple times, and then it was, okay, you can leave her.
Okay. So all you Mimis listening out there, keep praying because there's a time where all of a sudden church becomes a priority, a pursuit. And so for you right away, did you know other people at North Point? How did North Point land for you?
It was literally going, which one am I going to try this week?
Okay.
That was it.
Yeah.
And it was back in 2007 is when we first started coming.
So I was probably brand new Springfield campus at the time?
Yes.
Yeah, we never went to the movie theater once.
Okay. Okay. So, and then, how did you connect at North Point? I mean, a lot of people will come, and it's always interesting to me to figure out, okay, what are the things that got them to keep coming back and made it part of your priority?
For me, he is less of a joiner. I'm more of a joiner. And so I volunteered in the North Point for quite a while. We did door opening. He was willing to have that type of exchange with people. But short of that, that's all I could get him to do. We actually went and opened Joplin for a while. We went down there. And then when Nixa came, we volunteered there as the door greeters and that type of stuff. And then we stepped away for a little while.
Yeah. So, and you got baptized at North Point. Was that up at the Springfield campus?
Yeah, it was the old school way, like where you went on like a Wednesday night or something.
It was just us in a little room.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't in front of everybody. So I was one of the...
He would never have done it.
Oh, not a chance. No.
Jumbotron.
Yeah. It was very personal. That was almost intense there.
I remember he told me the day before and said, well, I'm not going to work. I have an appointment at the church. And I said, what for? I mean, like, that's the type of private that he is. Yeah. And he said, I'm going to get baptized. And you could have just knocked me over. I had no idea that was the process. So called into work, and I had a baby on my hip, and went and watched him get baptized. And that was it.
Wow. So BJ, I'm curious in the sense of, okay, you don't grow up going to church.
No.
At what point did you feel like Jesus was speaking to you?
I guess just the more I went, I guess, and like you said, having a kid now, and just kind of felt at some point I was getting selfish, like just doing things for me, and eventually, I guess, one time just something happened. I don't know what, and it's one of those awkward, raise your hand and I'll pray for you kind of things. And for some reason, it's like, man, my hand's up. What did I do?
Wow.
And it just started happening, and so it was. I'm glad I did, for sure. I mean, the only religious my family had was I had a grandma she was pretty hardcore Jehovah's Witness, and that was a whole different way, and I knew I didn't want nothing that way. I like Christmas and Halloween and presents and stuff, so it's like...
That's a terrible marketing strategy.
The recruiting's hard, I'm sure. Yeah. So, that was the only experience I had with any of it, so...
Wow. Yeah. So you jump in at North Point, and then side note too is career-wise, what have y'all been doing career-wise at that point, and where were you at?
I've been a nurse my entire career, so I've been a nurse for 20 years at the hospital.
Specialty?
Cardiology.
Okay. All right. And BJ?
I was blue collar. I was a welder, and then I've been an electrician since 2012-ish, somewhere in there. So just construction and job sites and stuff like that. So
that's awesome. Yeah. And so did you have, were you involved in community groups? Were you, what other kind of things, were part of your North Point experience? Did you ever have any of that?
We did a few of just the second Saturdays used to be a thing. We did a lot of the second Saturdays. And then just life took over. We had another daughter, and so we were busy. He did a lot of coaching of our girls' T-ball teams, basketball teams, all that kind of stuff.
I traveled for a couple of years. Yeah. So I was home 4 days a month. So, I kind of doing my apprenticeship, so I had to, they kind of had me, so I had to go wherever they wanted me to go. So that took a couple of years to get through. So.
Well, let's walk to that part of the journey, which is a painful part of the story, where you have two daughters. This is 2018. Walk us through the journey where your daughter began to get sick and the days that followed that.
Sure. So Abigail, our first daughter, 10 years old, perfectly healthy child, did all of the sports, didn't do them all well, but did them all with energy and enthusiasm. That's
how my high school coaches described me.
She was wonderful. I love the story of whenever she made her first basket. She had played basketball for 4 years. And it was the very last game of the season. And I had promised her a Frosty from Wendy's if she just tried to make a basket. Not only did she try, but she made the basket. And the entire team ran to the other side, and she stood there, and she and I just stared at each other, screaming up and down and stuff. So that's Abigail, just very enthusiastic, very healthy, never had any issues. And it was on a Sunday. Actually, it was the Saturday night. Went to Saturday night service at Nixa, and they had a taco truck there. And she loves tacos. And then all of us, she just didn't want to eat her taco. And I thought, well, that's odd. And she goes, I just don't really feel very well. And I thought, well, we'll see. It was Cinco de Mayo. And so there was lots of stuff going on. I thought, well, maybe you're just extra tired. The next day she had a fever. I mean, how many times have our kids had fevers? It was a low-grade fever. She had a goal of having 100% attendance at school, so she didn't want to miss school. So I took her to a Walmart clinic, had them check her out. Everything was fine. They thought just something viral. So I drugged her with some Tylenol and some ibuprofen. But the next day, that fever got a little bit higher. She still acted fine, but the fever got up to, higher. So I took her into her doctor. Couldn't find anything wrong with her. Had to miss school. She was really upset that she had to miss school. Yeah. She lost that. You could get a Nerf gun, like those big Nerf guns, if you got perfect attendance. And this is May, so we're at the end of the year. And she had done it all the way until then. The fever kept going higher. Over the course of 3 days, so from Sunday to Wednesday, so 4 days, I had her to the ER twice, to urgent care twice, and to her primary care doctor 3 times. There was something wrong with my kid, but all that she had was a fever. She was tired and her chest hurt, and that was all that there was nothing. Every single test came back negative, that there was nothing wrong with her. And then Wednesday, I went to work, left her on the couch with Dad. When I came home, she wouldn't hardly move on the couch, and her fever was 105. And so I put her in the car, and he was actually going to go teach her softball team. He was going to go coach them, and I said, well, I'm just going to take her in. And when we got there, I could tell by looking at her that her breathing was starting to be off. And being a nurse, I went up to the counter and just told them, take me back there, or I'm going to use my badge and I'm going to go back there myself because there's something wrong with my child. And from then, it was just a whirlwind. Her lungs were failing. So I called him. They were scrambling around her, putting her on oxygen. We were at an urgent care. So they called an ambulance, and I called him and I said, hey, we're going to the hospital by ambulance. And even then, it was a lot, but it wasn't catastrophic. I mean, it was our kid's sick. That was all. And so he got someone to cover, and he came up, and they brought an ambulance. By that point, Abigail was like, this oxygen's amazing. I feel great. I feel fine. She was awake, talking to me. She was excited to get to ride in the back of an ambulance, wanted to make sure I was going to get to go. And I still remember to this day, she was in the back of the ambulance, and I grabbed a hold of the handle to pull myself up into it, and flashed before my eyes was the letters, she died. It was just clear as day, and it even made me stumble back a little bit, so I stepped off the ambulance, and the workers there were like, do you need some help? And it kept flashing, she died, she died, she died. And I didn't know what that meant, and I just couldn't understand that, and I thought, well, that's just silly. So I got up in back of the ambulance. She was pushing all the buttons. She thought this was the coolest thing ever. And once we got admitted to the hospital, it just kind of all went down from there.
That was in Springfield.
That was in Springfield. We went to Mercy. I'm a Cox employee, so I do like it better that we went to a different hospital than where I work at. That has been a gift. Now I can see that as a gift. Now I can see that. We got admitted, still nothing wrong with her, had all the scans, everything looked fine. There's nothing wrong with your child. But the second they took the oxygen off of her, her numbers would plummet and they would have to put it back on her. And she could very obviously struggle with breathing if you took the oxygen off. Well, a healthy 10-year-old girl shouldn't have that. Right. And so we got admitted to the regular pediatric floor. Oxygen levels continued to decrease. Her oxygen demand continued to rise. And so we got then sent over to the ICU. And the whole time that flashing, she died, kept going in my face. But I thought, that's absurd. That can't be about my child. I'm looking at her. She's okay. And we ended up in the ICU, and they still didn't know what was wrong with her. And she was getting very sick and requiring a lot of oxygen. And it was on Mother's Day, on the Sunday. So she had the fever on the Sunday. And then the next Sunday, which was Mother's Day, I actually heard her say her last words, which I didn't know at the time they would be her last words, of course. But we did talk, and they had to put a breathing tube down because she just couldn't do it anymore. And so she had she was intubated then on Mother's Day that day. And it was at that moment that I thought, are those words for her? Are those she died words that I keep saying, is that her?
Wow.
Still didn't have an answer for what was wrong with her. And once the doctors don't know what they're treating, I mean, you can't treat it. They don't know what to do. So we were transferred to St. Louis, to Children's Hospital there.
at that point, how desperate are the two of you? Do you know how critical this is when
I think it finally started dawning on me when she got the breathing tube and stuff. And I think I even called Brad.
Yeah.
Actually.
I think we did.
Just don't know why.
Yeah.
And I think he brought a coffee up there. And I'm like, man, this is going bad. And we talked, and it was fine for a while. But I think then it's like, we're going to St. Louis. Good things don't happen in St. Louis a lot of the time for kids.
Yeah.
I was starting to develop tunnel vision at that point. I mean, I've been a nurse for a lot of years. I know what all those numbers on all those monitors mean. I know what all those lab values mean. I knew this was very, very bad.
Yeah.
I was trying to protect him somewhat from that very, very bad feeling, but I knew this was bad. And I more so knew that we didn't know what was wrong with her. And so when we got to St. Louis, that's when my tunnel vision really, there was nothing else in the world. It was just focused just on her. And they gave us hope the first day we were there, and it was the first breath of hope I had. They didn't seem concerned that they didn't know what was wrong with her. They're like, we see sick kids, really sick kids all the time. This is something that we can manage, and we can do that. And I remember that doctor, I don't know his name, but he was 7'2". Like, that was really truly how tall he was. And I hugged him, and I remember my face was right at his belly button, and it was so uncomfortable, but I didn't care because he was telling me that. I remember saying, you're going to give her back to me, and she can swim, because Abigail loved to swim, and it was coming into summer, and I was worried about her lungs not being able to swim, and he's like, she can swim. And it was just beautiful. And they wanted to get a CAT scan of her. So I went with her to the CAT scan, and I sat outside the room, and while she was in the CAT scanner, I was sitting in the floor of the hospital, and I called her school, I called her teachers, just sharing that we're going to be okay. I called everyone I could think of. And it was the first time I had, like, this is going to be okay. And then we got back to her room there in the hospital, and BJ was messing, doing stuff back behind her head. And again, I went right to her, and I could tell this was off. Something was off. And I was just staring at her, and I could hear the alarms going off around her, but I didn't know what they were for because I was so focused on her. Yeah. And then they started moving, and they moved quickly. And I looked up at the monitors, and it was her heart rate. And a child's heart rate is fast. It's 120, something like that. And hers was 70, and it just kept dropping, and it kept dropping. And I know what that means and what danger that is. And so I hollered at BJ. We needed to get out of the room. And the second that the doctors and nurses really looked at her, and I remember they said, this is real. And they started lowering her head of her bed down. And then her heart stopped, and it went flat. And I said to code her, and we ran out of the room, and I made it just to the edge of the room before every single strength of me dropped, and I was on the floor. And they started doing CPR on my child. And so I heard that bed bounce. And of this entire story, that is the hardest part for me, is the sound of that bed bouncing, knowing that they were doing compressions on my kid. I have done compressions on many, many people. Working in cardiology, that's what I do. I know what those patients look like. I know what their faces look like. I know what it feels like. And that was on my baby, my 10-year-old little girl, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, perfect. And they were doing compressions. And I could hear the things around me. But I got sucked out of my body, and I went in her room. And it sounds crazy because I am not someone that believes in this kind of stuff. But I could hear everything, but all I saw was her. And it was white all around her, and she was smiling. And I could only see her face, and I was at the top of the ceiling looking at her, watching. But I could hear everything around her, and I could hear that bed bouncing, and I could hear his desperate cries, and I could hear the doctors talking to him, and I heard them trying to take me to the ER because they thought I was dying. It was just awful.
I thought it was going to be a combo.
Yeah.
They're just handing you paperwork, and it's like TV, just a mass of people in there, and it's sign this, sign that, and you don't know what you're going to get when it's all done. Man.
That's one of my regrets, is that I left him alone in that time. But it wasn't a choice.
No,
I left him alone to deal with all of that.
Yeah.
At some point, the doctor came and said that the only chance to save her in that moment was to be placed on an ECMO. ECMO is the highest level of life support that is in existence, and what it is a heart and lung machine. So they place cannulas into the blood vessels of your neck or your groin, and they take all of the blood out and then put the blood back in, and it does the entire work of your heart and your lungs. Because at that point, Abigail's heart was not working, and her lungs were not working at all. And if they were to stop compressions and breathing for her, she would die. And so we did sign the paperwork. Well, he signed the paperwork saying
somewhere in there
that to place her on that machine. And so that ECMO machine was the thing that in that moment saved her from death in that moment.
Yeah.
Afterwards, when they let us to come back in there to her, I laid my head on her chest, and her heart wasn't beating. But it didn't have to beat because that machine was doing the work for it. But to lay your head on your baby's chest and you heard nothing, it was bad. It was really bad. And ECMO is a thing that in the healthcare community we know that's the last ditch effort. There's nothing beyond that. So the goal is always, they say anything after 10 days exponentially increases the chance of complications from that machine. Yeah. That machine is so high tech and so vital that the complications from the machine itself are almost sometimes worse than the illness that the child has. Yeah. But we didn't know what was wrong with her. And so the idea is that the ECMO machine would buy us time to figure out what was wrong with her and then correct whatever it was that was wrong with her.
There were still tests. I mean, they were testing for diseases that don't even exist anymore. They were thinking about going to our house and checking for stuff. I mean, we were going to get rid of animals. We had no idea what was causing this. You know, everybody was stumped.
They called in doctors from different countries. They videoed in on our room. We were trying to find out what was wrong with this little girl. And there was just no answers ever. And the whole time, all I see is her. Everything else in the world disappeared. It was just her. It was hard.
How much time did you have?
We had 9 days from the time that she was placed on ECMO. She was sick. She was in the hospital for 16 days. But on day 9, after having the ECMO machine placed, it was a night that just it all came undone. And Abigail was just a dreamboat child. They said how wonderful of an ECMO patient she was because it's scary for kids. And they would let her wake up. She would wake up during this time. And she watched Jumanji and Hunger Games. And we read to her and we talked to her as best we could. But she got to where she was getting angry and she was fighting us. And that was not like her. And it wasn't her. I could tell by looking at her face that this was not her doing this. And we knew that something else was going wrong. And so then here come back all the people, all the tests. And at one point, I got so mad at the sounds and the lights, and it was just too much. And I told everyone to shut up. And I yanked the blankets back off of her because I needed to see my kid completely. And you could see at that point that her whole body was just huge. And later, we learned that her liver had actually broke open. She was just so sick, and her tissues were so friable that when I pulled back those sheets, her body was filled with her own blood. She was just bleeding inside. So we did a lot of scans and a lot of checks, all very, very quickly. And it was determined that that's what had happened, that her liver had torn. No reason for it. It's just that's how sick she was. And there weren't a lot of options, but we sat in this little room that is a terrible little room. And there were 3 doctors in there, and it was about 5 in the morning.
It's like a waiting room for
it's even worse room than that.
It's a consultation.
A bad newsroom is what it is.
And so we sat in there, and it was just he and I, and then 3 doctors were in there. And there was just this roar. I can remember hearing this roar. But it was just inside of me. It was just a roar. It made it hard to hear everything the doctors were saying. And they just looked at me after they had told me everything that they had found and all the scans and what different scenarios could look like. And I said, "Are you telling me that my daughter dies today?" And they didn't answer me. And as a nurse, I pick up on things. And I looked over at the surgeons, the trauma surgeons that had come in. They had come from home. And I looked at their shoes, and they were nice shoes. And I know that a surgeon doesn't come in to do surgery and wear nice shoes. They wear their work clothes. If they're coming in to do something emergently, they're coming in their work clothes to go to work. And these ladies were in nice shoes, and I stared at those shoes for just, it seemed like forever. But
they knew they didn't want to try. They knew there was no hope, and they were hoping we would get to that same conclusion with them.
And the 3 saddest words ever spoken, and I said, "Let her die." And then they just stared at me, and I wondered if the roaring, did they not hear me over the sound of that roar? And so I said it again, and I said it a 3rd time. And then I looked at him, and I needed him to say, "Okay." And he just nodded his head.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. So they gave us about 5 minutes to get her ready, and we went into her room. And that sound that people say that moms make when they know their kid has died, I remember hearing that. And now I know it came out of me. And I climbed into bed with her. And I hadn't been able to do that since she'd been on ECMO because it wasn't safe for her. But I climbed into the bed with her. And I just tried to put myself inside her. I tried to just shove her in me. And everyone was talking, and I tried to cover her ears so they wouldn't hear them talking about her dying. Mm-hmm. And BJ stood next to us.
Well, yeah, then I had the laptop in the other room, and that was the organ donation laptop, and you're filling that out while your kid's there. But, as soon as I hit enter, that's the last question. And then they come in and start unhooking everything. And it's over. There's some questions on those organ donation things. It's hard to answer when you got a 10-year-old. It's very personal, and you just know it's like, when I do this, it's over.
Wow.
And,
we don't know how long it took. We don't know the time of her death. We've never looked. We've never wanted to know what that time was. But I knew when it happened. And I kept seeing her face get wet. And it was his tears that were falling on her face. So I kept wiping them off of him. And she died. Mm-hmm. Abigail died on May 25th, 2018.
Yeah. Wow. When you're there, do you have other family that's gathered at that point?
No, because it happened so quick. I mean, it went, the wheels came off so quick. Like from 3 a.m. to like 5, all these decisions were made, and we're in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Everybody's down here, and we have another daughter this whole time, and we didn't get a chance to bring her up and say goodbye either.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a chance. I don't know how we drove from St. Louis.
So you drive that day?
Yep.
That day?
A couple hours after.
Well, a thing that no one knows, because unless you're in it, you don't know. But when your kid dies at the hospital, they just look at you. Mm-hmm. And you have to walk out of that hospital, find your car, and then get it and drive home. Like, no one ever talks. That's not something you prepare for. You prepare for, how is my kid going to start kindergarten? You prepare for these different life events on how you're going to handle it. But not when your kid dies in the hospital. What do? They literally just looked at us. And I said, "Do we go?" And they said, "Yes." And so I tucked her in and walked out.
Packed the suitcase. I mean, we were living in that room for a week. Yeah. I packed a suitcase like I was leaving a motel room and left our kid behind.
Yeah. We drove home. It was, we didn't say a word. A couple of family members had called to check in to see how things were going. We didn't know how to answer that phone.
They were on their way up to see her because they thought it was just going to be a normal day. And I feel bad. I was kind of cold about it. I go, "She's dead. Don't come up here. We're leaving." And that was the end of the phone call,
Yeah.
And I didn't know what else to do. I said, I don't remember the drive from St. Louis back to Marshfield.
I remember the drive.
don't know how we got there.
So our youngest daughter was in Marshfield with his parents, and so we had to go there. And another thing they don't prepare you for is how to tell a 7-year-old that her sister died. I had just spent 16 days of just pure torture, of no control, not able to save my kid. I couldn't help my kid. I couldn't save her. I could not protect her. And I sat in front of that little brown-haired little girl, and I knew I couldn't save her. I couldn't protect her. And how much my words were about to just destroy her world and how she knew it. And so telling her, that's part of the story that I don't talk too much about. It's just too raw.
Yeah.
And so I told her that her sister had died. And we went and fed chickens. And then we went home. A home that was very, very different.
Yeah.
Because her backpack was still by the door.
It was the way we left it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Clothes, a room. She was supposed to come back. Never did.
So your world absolutely shattered,
20
screeches
days.
to a standstill, and the rest of the world continues and goes on.
Yeah.
And you're having to find your way back into that rhythm.
Well, we did. I didn't. BJ went back to work about 2 weeks afterwards.
Yeah.
I think he needed it. I wasn't quite functioning yet. I made a list every morning: get up, brush teeth, get dressed. I had to have a list to tell me how to function.
Get through this day.
This day, not this day. It was this. I did 15-minute increments. I watched the clock and I waited till I got 15 minutes, and I would say, I'm still alive. Let's see if I can go to the next 15. And it gradually grew as the time passed, those increments that I watched. But I did stay off work. Cox was wonderful. They worked very well with us and our family. And I was off for 4 months before I went back to work.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to walk through what is life on this other side of the most defining and traumatic thing a parent could go through. What did that look like? What did faith look like? Now looking back 6 years later, and so I wanted to get into this. So we're going to continue this conversation. And those of you who are joining us, I know all of us have people in our lives who have gone through so many traumatic things, but some of you might be going through something beyond what you can even imagine. And I hope you hear today that you're not alone. There's this sorority or fraternity of wounded people. And I don't know that's encouraging, but it true.
Exists.
It exists. And just that thought of, man, for those next 15 minutes, you got this and you get through this. And then next week we'll walk through this journey of what happens as these days begin to blend and now weeks and years begin to add up. How do you go forward? How do you not get over but get through? And we're going to walk through that. And if you've got someone in your world that you know this would be important, I encourage you to share this. And next week as we continue this conversation, as we hear, what does this look like? How's this impacted faith? And so thank you for being with us today and sharing your story. And I want to thank those who are listening, and we'll continue this again on our next episode.